Hi students, this week we are going to focus on composition, which is a very important subject within two-dimensional art. Composition refers to the visual layout of your drawing, and specifically how you compose your subjects or your objects within your frame. Artists have strategies that we use for coming up with strong compositions. One of these tools or strategies that we have is to produce a series of thumbnail sketches. Thumbnail sketches are very small drawings. They're no bigger than a few inches, and the purpose of thumbnail sketches is to kind of visualize what a final drawing might look like without actually having to invest hours and hours of work. Now, this is really good because if you produce a series of thumbnail sketches, you'll get to see beforehand what arrangement works and what maybe doesn't work as well. So if we look at these sketches, we can maybe intuitively say that we like some possibilities more than others. If I study these, I would say that right now I think this and this are working pretty nicely. I kind of like the dramatic cast shadow here that the apple is casting. My eye moves on a diagonal, and I think that's pretty interesting, although unusual for this drawing. I like the general harmony, how everything is well balanced. Nothing is sharply cropped within the frame in this image. It's also nice how the alignment of these forms is creating kind of a visual diagonal, and it makes my eyes move from one corner to the other. Here, it just seems kind of awkward how some of the forms are just so cropped here. And this seems well balanced, but it doesn't seem very interesting to me. And although I like this vantage point, kind of more of a bird's eye view, I also think it's kind of awkward how most of the forms are too cropped. So these are the kinds of thoughts that might take place after producing a series of thumbnail sketches. They are very helpful, and it is something that we're going to practice doing for our next assignment. In order to produce a strong composition, an artist might also use a viewfinder. A viewfinder is just a frame. It's a frame made out of sturdy paper like cardstock, and the opening can be rectangular or square. What you do is you hold that frame, you look at the subject that you might draw, and basically it helps you visualize how your subject might look within the frame before you draw it. If you move the frame around slowly, you'll get an idea of different possibilities for drawing. You might be wondering, is there such thing as a strong composition? And if so, are there strategies that we can implement or think about in order to produce strong compositions? And the answer is yes. So in this video, I'm going to summarize some points photographer Steve McCurry makes in his own video on YouTube. I'm going to summarize some of these points, and it's just something good to know generally. So first, the rule of thirds. The idea is to divide our paper into approximate thirds, and when you draw, it's good to place your main subjects or your focal points on the intersection points. And generally this creates a nice sense of balance. Here we see an example of that with one of McCurry's own photographs. Notice how the head of this man is placed along this intersection point. You can also place important elements along these dividing thirds. And this is particularly relevant to landscape. So notice in this photograph how the land here in the foreground pretty much matches up with this bottom third line. And notice how the bottom part of this mountainous region matches up with the top third line. And again, this creates a sense of balance within the frame. Leading lines are very good within compositions. They're dynamic and they create a strong sense of depth within the frame. Diagonals. Including diagonals within compositions is something that I like to do. Notice how in this picture, the posts of this fence create kind of a diagonal, but so do the hikers here. If we look at this painting by Picasso, we can see how one hand along with the neck of this guitar leads us to this other hand, and then this hand kind of leads us to the foot. So this painting has a strong diagonal running through it, and it makes it more interesting. And also it's worth pointing out that this general area of lightness, this triangular lightness, is counterbalanced by this triangle of darkness. So it does also exhibit a good sense of balance. Movement. Generally, it's helpful when a composition has kind of sweeping movement throughout the frame. Notice these are two different pictures. One is almost like a two-dimensional design, and this is a painting, but they exhibit very similar movement within the frame. My eyes start at one point and then they travel to a different point within the frame. We all know that symmetry is very pleasing to the human eye. So here we see an example of vertical symmetry. So the elements on this side pretty much match the elements on this side. And here is an example of horizontal symmetry. So the area on the top here pretty much matches the area along the bottom. Here's an example of a painting that includes both vertical and horizontal symmetry. So the elements on this side match this side, and the area here, this empty area, is counterbalanced by this positive area here. And finally, same idea with this famous print by Hokusai, The Great Wave of Kanagawa. The positive space taken up by the wave is pretty much balanced with the negative area behind it. Now, whatever your subject is, sometimes it's a good idea to zoom in a little bit. It gives your subject a sense of importance and also maybe potentially creates a more dramatic effect. Notice what happens when we apply this to drawing. An apple might seem like an ordinary subject, but if we zoom in on it, we can appreciate more details and the ordinary becomes extraordinary. So this is something to consider in your own drawing. Sometimes it's visually interesting to have strong contrast between foreground and background, or just generally your subject and the background. Here we can see this applied to a drawing. The cups are light in relation to the background, which is a lot darker. So this video just provides a very brief introduction to composition. For this week, the assignment is to create a very finished drawing of a pair of shoes. I want you to apply everything you've learned so far with regard to approaching drawing, looking for forms, applying shading techniques. But really, the ultimate goal here is to produce a composition that is strong. And it is a requirement to include at least 2 shoes in this drawing. And I that in this particular study, the artist has decided to hang the shoes, and it's kind of a creative solution for this study. Before you begin your final drawing, I definitely want you to produce at least 6 thumbnail sketches so you can visualize different compositional possibilities before you begin. If you want to produce more thumbnail sketches, that's totally fine, and I would even recommend it if you'd like. They don't take too long to produce, and remember, with thumbnail sketches, they can totally be rough. They don't have to be beautiful finished works of art within themselves. The purpose of the thumbnail is to help you visualize a final product without actually having to invest a lot of time. The requirement is 2 shoes. If you want to include 2 different shoes, that's fine. But again, the ultimate goal is to produce something that is compositionally interesting. How can you achieve a successful drawing? One thing for sure, make sure that you really push your darks in your shoe. I don't recommend that you draw light shoes like white shoes, because overall the shoes are going to be light and it doesn't really provide you with an opportunity to practice your shading techniques. It's much better to work with shoes that are medium to dark. Let's look at this study for a minute. Clearly this drawing is more successful than this one, and that's largely due to the fact that this has a much wider value range. This looks very flat. It almost looks like a line drawing, and you can see that there's only one single tone. There's one gray, and that is why it looks flat. Here we can see transitions between darkness and lightness, and this is what is ultimately giving the drawing a sense of depth and definition. Notice how dark here the cast shadow is. For this drawing, as you study compositional possibilities, I do recommend that you set up a very good lighting situation so you get some nice highlights and some nice shadows as well. The requirement is to draw at least 2 shoes. Now, if you think you can achieve a more successful drawing by incorporating other things to prop up the shoes, then please do so. Really, the challenge is for you to produce an interesting composition, and you can use your creativity to achieve that goal.